I mean, weirdly, as obvious as it seems, you have to understand as a business person that in almost all cases, there's a few exceptions, but in almost all cases, you're mostly interested in the data, not the program.
I'm joined today by Dave McComb. He's the president and co-founder of Semantic Arts. He and his team help organizations like Procter & Gamble, Goldman Sachs, Dun & Bradstreet, Morgan Stanley uncover the meaning of data from their information system. Dave is also the author of The Data-Centric Revolution, Software Wasteland, and Semantics in Business Systems. Thanks for joining me today, Dave.
Yeah, Jason, thank you.
So what do people need to watch for when they start their data-centric revolution?
I guess the first thing is to recognize where you are. A lot of people want to describe what the future state looks like and all that kind of stuff, but I think you have to understand how bad your current state is. I mean, that's what a lot of Software Wasteland was all about, was how people have somehow convinced themselves that projects that could cost, 1 or 2 million, they budget them at 50, and by the time they're at 100 million, they realize they're now a hostage to their vendor. And these things, one of the stories I talk about in the book was how Healthcaregov started life as the peculiarly precise $93.7 million. You can go out and research this stuff and find it. And by the time it launched, they'd already spent 500 million. It was a terrible system, as everybody who tried to use it that week, including myself, found out. And the version that we currently have was $2 billion in total. Several people have come in and saved the day for a mere 500 million and all that kind of crap. But the literal truth is it wasn't even a $100,000 project. Some people from Healthcare.Sherpa built the exact same thing, team of 3 or 4 people over 2 or 3 months. I've interviewed them. I interviewed their CEO. It really wasn't a very complicated system at all. If you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars to implement a system, you should immediately stop and rethink that.
The metaphor that I use is you imagine yourself on the 1-yard line looking down another 99 yards. You don't plan your end zone celebration right now. That's the launch. That's the end game. You have to run a number of plays to get you there. You're going to have setbacks. You're going to have turnovers, and eventually you're going to get there. But without thinking through your strategy for the next 99 yards, you'll never get to that end zone play. Why is it that organizations skip straight to the end zone, think, okay, we're going to launch tomorrow, and be damned with the planning? Is it just not standardized? Is it just not well known what that planning should be?
One of the things that people have to realize, what's become sort of the new normal, is what we call the application-centric quagmire. And it sort of became the new normal, way back when you're implementing your first computer system, it was probably a payroll system, solving that one problem was a great thing to do. And then you had dozens and hundreds, and most of our clients now have thousands of systems. And every time they have a new problem, let's go launch another application project, because that is nice and bounded and we can solve it and have a victory celebration. Like you say, we're already in the end zone because we've picked this package. But the literal truth is, firstly, implementing those applications has gotten incredibly difficult because of the other 1,000 applications. It's mostly a systems integration project. And the more things you try to tie to it, the more pieces you bring in, the more complex it gets. And because that's all we've ever known, people just keep doubling down on that, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, and it's in those fringe points, and that's something that when I was talking to John Mancini, former past president of AIM and consultant in the data governance industry, it's something that he identified, especially in wake of like the pipeline, the Colonial Pipeline, and these types of things. It's the fact that vendor application gets deployed and then another vendor, but the integration points and the data flow between the systems and the process and the data-centric view is never taken. Therefore, it's in those jumps between systems that it's trivially easy to attack, and people never really think of them as they start to integrate. I believe even the techniques that we use to purchase software as big organizations, you put out a feature request RFP or an RFI, and then a vendor will bid it feature for feature, not focused on outcomes. Is that one of the things where we shoot ourselves in the foot?
Yep. The longer your requirements checklist, the more complex a system you're going to get, whether that's what you want or not, because in order to check all those items in the checklist, you need a giant system that's been around forever and can do it all. And at some level, being able to do it all sounds great, but actually, in practice, it isn't. And what ends up killing you is there's this level of complexity that is almost hard to imagine. I was on a call the other day, and I mentioned that one of our clients just did a data profile project and discovered that they have 70 million columns under management. That's not 70 million rows, that's 70 million columns amongst their thousands of systems they have and thousands of data sets and various other things. Now, nobody can understand and or manage 70 million concepts. And when you especially just put that in contraposition to what you actually need, every large enterprise we've gone into, we design an enterprise ontology, which is a high level model of the concepts you actually need to run your company. It's typically around 500, not 500,000 or anything even remotely close to 70 million. So there's such a staggering gap, and some of the systems you can buy these days have already 1 million columns. If you implement SAP, you're, depending on how you configure it, you're picking up 90 to 100,000 tables and close to 1 million columns. That's just added into the 70 million you already have, and just keep going.
Yeah, like I'm imagining awfully complex worlds out there of, like, if I'm shopping at Best Buy or something like that, I couldn't imagine having 76 million facets to choose from.
Yeah, no.
That's silly. And I can't imagine how organizations would even want that. But I get how it happens. Like, I mean, you hire a co-op student, they make an access database, and now it becomes part of your master data.
Right.
And so there's a normalization that must happen, and your organization is doing that. Does the customers always want to conflate that with too many other things? Like, well, if I'm going to do normalization of this content, shouldn't I be doing data lakes and analytics and data science and 5 other things that forget that you're still sitting at the start line?
Yeah. In fact, data lakes is a classic admission of defeat. That we had data warehouses, and people were at least attempting for a while to conform all their various systems into a relatively simple, set of fact tables and dimension tables. But of course, 2 things happened. One, that just the demand and the speed, people just started rushing things into their data warehouse, to where the typical data warehouse now has tens of thousands of tables, which is sort of defeats the purpose. But even that wasn't fast enough. And people said, no, we're acquiring data at such a rate, we can't bother with this normalization. Just throw it in the data lake and we'll come get it later. And of course, you know what happens there. There's just a bunch of junk in the data lake. Then you have a new project. Well, let's curate the data lake, and God.
Well, maybe talk to me about how you can explore in your writings, in your books, and with your customers, turning this whole idea of, okay, we're going to dump it here, we're going to do this project, turning them into programs that are continually realigning the data. How does somebody start doing that as an organization?
Yeah, we have this methodology we call think big, start small. And the start small part is obvious. Everybody wants to start small. Everybody wants to be agile. That, in fact, we advocate, don't do a $50 million project. Don't do a $100 million project. Do a small project that's going to prove something. But if that's all you do, you run the danger of creating yet another silo. Most small projects, most agile things are yet another silo, and that's what we're trying to get past. So the reason we have think big and start small running in parallel is the think big part says do at least enough of your enterprise ontology to cover the concepts you're going to have in this start small thing in a way that is future proof, and as you do the next several projects or dozens of projects, that it will just sort of grow organically without having to be refactored and start over again. So and so once you get that going, and once you've got some subset of your datascape in a knowledge graph, conform to a simple ontology, you're getting some value out of it, you're starting to grow it out, then people look at it and say, oh, that's what you were talking about.
An agile project, of course, can fail, but you fail so much faster and so much more efficiently than a big project that runs over. Could we quantify that? Maybe you could contrast an example of one that started off as a wedge and then grew into something big and successful versus something that started off as the monolith and then grew into an elephant that never solved the problem.
Yeah. But we did the monolith with Healthcaregov. I think one of the best examples of something that started small and grew organically very nicely. There's a hospital system in New York City called Montefiore. It includes the Albert Einstein Hospital, and it's mostly in the Bronx. And 7 or 8 years ago, initially did several projects just with NIH grants and NSF grants. They'd get a 500,000 here, $1 million here, and they'd have a 3 or 4 person project. But they were constantly adding on to where now they have 2 incredible assets. One is they have pretty much all of medical knowledge in a knowledge graph and all integrated. A lot of people have SNOMED and Loincs and ICD-9 and MESH and all that stuff, but poorly integrated. This thing is very well integrated to where you can interrogate for almost any kind of rare condition and drug interaction and all that stuff. But that's actually the small part of their solution. The big part is they now have all 3 million of their patients, every bit of data they have about them, from radiology and lab and EMR and scheduling and billing and all that stuff, is also in this giant knowledge graph, hundreds of billions of triples integrated with the medical knowledge, such that they can overnight look at certain patients and recommend treatments and have you considered this, and they're getting benefits all over the place. I was talking to Parsa, who's the guy who heads this up. They did a project. Hospitals are required to do sepsis reporting. If you get infected in the hospital, that's pretty nasty. It's fairly deadly. Therefore, there's lots of regulators that are looking over your shoulder constantly. They had a team of 12 people that did nothing but sepsis reporting back to the government, because what happens is you gather little bits of the case from all the different systems and you package it up in a document and send it to the regulators, and they spot the out points in it. Wait a minute, you said this here and you this drug there, and did it. Now, because everything is in the graph and it's all harmonized and connected, they just generate the report from the graph, give it to the regulators. And the first time they did this, the regulators came back and said, God, this has never happened. There's no inconsistencies in this report. Therefore, you don't have to do any more work, and thank you very much. And they just reassigned all 12 of those people, because all they were doing was massaging data to give to regulators.
So that's amazing to me, and I'll throw out what I hope is an apt metaphor, is that so it's not just telling people you can't do a big bang. It's actually demonstrating that this graph, unlike a waterfall-based project, is actually going to grow organically as you test and add more information and test and add more information and test and add more information, and it will become its own ecosystem, as opposed to becoming a functional product and then start. So it almost, it just mimics real life, is that we will evolve, or we will adapt to our environment, regardless of the words that you want to use. We will adapt to our environment that's given to us. And it seems like the data and the use of the data is going to adapt to that environment, but only if you give it a life cycle and a chance to do that.
I mean, weirdly, as obvious as it seems, you have to understand as a business person that in almost all cases, there's a few exceptions, but in almost all cases, you're mostly interested in the data, not the program. You know, it's the data about the sepsis. You don't really care how you got it or which program or how many pipelines or any of that stuff. You know, both somebody trying to you know, help somebody who's got an infection, or a regulator who's trying to look over your shoulder and say, you know, why didn't you intervene sooner, or whatever they ask. I don't know. It's about the data. And yet we try and solve the problem with programs. And you know, until you recognize that we got it backwards, I don't know that we're going to make much progress.
Well, isn't this just a function of the fact that, oh, that sounds like a computer thing, let's hand it to IT.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
IT doesn't really understand the business. So IT
Yep.
can go, oh, well, I understand ones and zeros, so I will deliver the tools, and then you make up the rules. And I have been hearing more and more about the line of business controlling the budgets, like, and IT now is becoming the stewards, the guards, and they're doing a good job of that. But unfortunately, software vendors are still forced to kind of come through the IT door. And as soon as you talk to the line of business, they punch you over there and say, well, get through them first, because I don't want to have to learn the technology. So isn't that a bit of a disconnect?
Interesting that there's a little bit of hope now, you know, from, I don't know when it was, must have been about the year 2000 to about the year 2010, seemed to be the height of outsourcing, you know, where so many large companies had just turned over their IT department wholesale to some third-party vendor. And what that did is made it even more unlikely that business could drive change, you know, because you're one degree even further removed. And, you know, there's all kinds of contractual and budgetary things that kind of kept the status quo in place. But our observation is more and more of our clients have reversed that nowadays. I'm not seeing outsourcing nearly as much as we used to, which is good. And as you suggest, the line of businesses are starting to take over the budget again. In fact, even though it's a buzzword, it's a useful one. This whole idea of digital transformation. I mean, that's, if there ever was a buzzword, you know. But what it is doing is providing the line of business an excuse to take over IT functionality.
Yeah, if they're the primary beneficiary and they can understand it and they can best set up the rules, then they should be driving the tools as well. It does make sense. Touching on how do we help like big five consultants and integration companies and these types of things get on the trolley as well? Because touching on what you described there before, but once you've outsourced a lot of this IT and managed services and these types of things, now you got organizations who are running these programs working to a SLA instead of to an outcome. So how do we bring those types of integrators along as well in a way that maintains their SLA, but still makes them look good and innovative?
I don't think it's going to happen.
Okay.
I think the economics and the business model of the large integrators are such that you know, if you could convince them that that $100 million project they just did actually could have been done for $1 million, even if they believe that, which I don't think they do. I think they think they're that smart, and only people as clever as us could have possibly gotten that done for 100 million. If they believed it was 1 million, you got two problems. Do you charge your client 100 million and incur 1 million and keep 99 million in profit? It's harder to do that than you think. You really do have to show up with a lot of smart bodies that are actually getting in each other's way, you know, to incur those kinds of costs. And it's hard to bill when you're not incurring the cost. And then even if they did realize that, if they believed it, they'd sit there and think, gee, $100 million project is, you know, at least for them, relatively easy to sell. They're pretty good at it. They know how to do that. Are you telling me I'd have to go sell, you know, yeah, $100, $1 million projects just to get the same margin I'm getting off one project. Why would I do that? Selling is hard, you know. I don't think they're going to go there.
Yeah, and we sound like two software vendors talking right now, because it is the truth. Like, I mean, when you're entrepreneurial, you're always trying to find a way to drive down the cost because you need to be a 10x. However, it seems like what you're displacing is contrary to that. Yet a lot of the thought leadership for customers has been kind of also outsourced to these organizations as well.
Yeah, I think what's going to change the world is when business decides that they're really going to run their own destiny, if you will, because they've sort of, first they deferred it to IT, and then IT in turn deferred it to the vendors. You know, the vendors know better. Well, no, I don't know they do. I think once a business decides, no, actually we can take it from here, is where the real progress is going to come from.
I agree. Like, it's there was that old adage is nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM, but I know people that have been fired for hiring IBM, despite the fact that I have lots of friends who work at IBM, and I like them, and they're sincerely working hard to deliver. But there's no such thing as that magic bullet organization out there that's going to guarantee success when you're trying to digitally transform or change your business.